Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show, and I get to talk to interesting people from all around the globe using this podcast every week, and I love doing it. We love bringing you the great stories and experiences from smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies and organizations. You can check out our archives. We've got Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, so many great stories and experiences there. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest here today is Michael Portz. He's done so many different things in his career, from leadership coaching, angel investing, serial entrepreneur, started companies in the Middle East, corporate executive, management consultant, even a paramedic and a professional musician. I don't know where that came from, but that's in there too. And he's lived all over the globe as well. We're going to talk about being the co-founder and CMO of a startup that went towards a $2 billion IPO. This was in the telecom space in the Middle East back in the late 2000s. And he's also been a business angel and investor and heavily involved in EO Entrepreneurs Organization, which I'm also involved in as well. So we'll talk about that involvement. And he's the author of the books Chief of Anything and 6 Situations of Feedback. And so we'll talk about those as well. And of course, this episode brought to you by my company, Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn all about what we do at rise25.com. All right, Michael, it's such a pleasure to have you here. And I want to ask you about this experience, one of the most fundamental experiences that shaped who you were. So you were kind of plucked out of Vodafone. You're working for Vodafone in a variety of different roles. And someone saw something in you because you were chosen to be part of this 4-year leadership program, which in your words, taught you a lot about leadership. So talk a little bit about that experience, and how it shaped your approaches towards leadership today.
Hey, John, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure and an honor. I'm humbled with hearing who all has been here. So I hope I'll be contributing in a meaningful way. What happened there was, I had been in my professional career for about 10 years. And before that, I was working in a consulting firm. First known as Anderson Consulting, later now known as Accenture. And at some point, I did what consultants occasionally do. I changed from the consulting firm to the client. That was my intention all along. I never went into consulting to make that a lifelong career. I went in there to learn a lot, because I felt after uni that I hadn't learned anything useful for real life. So consulting was good for that, because it got me around. Then eventually I was clear, now it's time to make the change. That was about almost 6 years into that consulting job. And the reason why I was keen to join this big global telco group, Vodafone, was because while I was working with them as a consultant, they had these posters on the rooms where they kept the printers and photocopier machines. And these posters showed a person climbing up a mountain, all in full climbing gear. And I'm not a mountaineer, but that poster struck me, hanging there in full size in that photocopier room. And then above that, it said something like, be one of our future leaders. So if you want to become a future leader of this organization, if you want to be one of the CEOs in this group, at the time there was about 25 CEOs, it's a worldwide conglomerate, then join this program to develop into becoming such a global leader. And I thought, wow, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. I always loved the world. I loved other countries. I loved that Vodafone was such a group in different countries and that it offered the opportunity to get around. And this idea of becoming a future CEO, I went, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. And I applied for the program. Now, the chances to get into that program at the time were very slim. We had about 70,000 employees worldwide, and they took in up to 20 every year.
Not a lot.
Right. What are the odds?
Yeah.
And they were looking for a very specific profile. And to make it worse, they said, and sometimes we don't even fill up the 20 because we only take exactly the people with the profile we're looking for.
That's like just adding insult to injury. It's like, yeah, we only took 6 people. We didn't see anyone else good.
I had no expectation that this was going to happen, but I was definitely keen and I was definitely willing to take the chance. And so I agreed to hire on an employment contract with Vodafone in order to be able to apply for that program. And they waived the requirement that I had to be at least 1 year as an employee because I had worked with them for 2 years as a consultant. So they said, probably smilingly, yeah, sure, you can apply. Nothing's going to happen anyways. Probably is what they were thinking, the back of their minds. And then I applied and the miraculous thing happened. I got in. And it changed my life. And ever since then, this idea of leadership development and learning those skills, those people skills, and honing people skills over time to be a great leader, that has become my sole purpose in my doing now, in my work. And it's, what I have developed out of this is an understanding of there are these elements of leadership. It's about leading myself. It's about leading others. And then comes to the obvious part, which is leading teams and leading bigger organizations. And what happened ever since then is I've been building this curriculum of leadership development tools. And ever since I started in that program, I started teaching my teams. So, it was the effect, okay, Michael has been to a training. Here we go. We're going to have a session and he's going to tell us what he learned. And that's what I have been doing. And what I noticed maybe 10, 12 years later is that actually I enjoy that the most, teaching and coaching and mentoring other people in their leadership roles and helping them to acquire those people skills that can help them to be super successful.
I'm also fascinated by when people realize something in themselves later that was present earlier. So to take a step backwards, you actually at age 12 or 13 years old started teaching others how to play piano. You were really good at piano and someone saw leadership potential in you in a sense, right? It was a local music store owner who said, I could see him leading others, teaching others to play the piano. In many ways, similar quality on a wider scale.
Yeah, good point. I like how you picked up on that. Thank you for the question. So, I was interested in music from age 6. And what I thought I was interested in was the technology. Because I had seen somebody on TV, those kind of those electrical organs
Keyboards.
back in the 70s, 80s, keyboards and synthesizers later.
Multiple levels to them,
I saw this guy on TV. He was playing on a 3-layer electrical organ, and it was like a $50,000 price tag. It was on television, and it looked like Star Trek. And that's the other thing I loved, Star Trek. So, I was 5 years old, and I saw this thing, and I knew Star Trek, and I saw an organ, and that sounded like what Star Trek looked like in the stories that Star Trek told. So I was sold. And then I begged my parents to learn piano. No, well, I want to learn the organ. They gave me an old piano to start on, which was good because it's a great instrument to start learning. And then that happened and evolved into that whole story until 6-7 years later in the music store where I was spending most of my free time hanging out, playing with all the instruments. I'm a musician at heart. I just ended up in business by coincidence. And the owner asked, well, you play really well. Would you consider giving lessons for me? And the guy was probably 50 years old. He was an old man in my eyes back then. I was 13 and I couldn't believe it that somebody was asking me to teach other people. And I was shakingly, I was very nervous. I said, yeah, I can try it. I've never done this. And that's okay. You'll do fine. He was very encouraging, very positively affirming me in the strengths that he had seen and that I didn't know of, which apparently was more than just, playing piano well and organ well, but also something interpersonal. Because, the first student that he gave me was a 60-year-old gentleman. And so here's this 13-year-old teaching a 6-year-old. And I was super humbled by all that. And the other thing is that this was my first business, first money that I made independently. And I made a ton of money. I did this 2 days in the afternoons, and it was a fantastic life as a teenager. I always had more than enough cash in my pocket.
That's great. So let's flash forward then from that experience. So you do the leadership program through Vodafone, 4-year program. And at some point, they kind of pluck you to be an executive for this startup that they were going to go into the Qatar market, Vodafone Qatar, and you were going to be CMO. And it ultimately become $2 billion IPO. But talk a little bit about what that experience was like, especially at this time. We're recording this in January 2023. And the World Cup just occurred in Qatar, but the country has changed tremendously in the last 15, 17 years since you were there. What was it like going into that market at that time?
If I may, I'll add one step in between, because it was an important, way of getting ready for that experience in Qatar. I was first sent to South Africa for 2 years to manage call centers. And I chose that deliberately because I wanted to get lots of people management experience. And going into customer care means working with hundreds or thousands of people. And that's exactly what happened. And it also meant that for the first time, I encountered coaching. And I had a professional coach who supported me to be successful in that role. Her name is Bev, and I'm eternally grateful for how she supported me. And it was also her who, for the first time, asked me that great question, what's your purpose in life, Michael? And that turned out years later in Qatar to be fundamentally important for what happened there. The tiny little things, that question, what's your purpose in life? And my answer was, I have no idea. So I went back for a month and then came back to our next session, and I had an idea, but it was very vague. And so anyway, I was in customer care. I did manage hundreds and in the end 2,500 people, and I built up all this people management experience, and including stuff like, there were what's it called? When there were strikes, we had situations with that, and so forth. So, South Africa was really exciting and was a fantastic place to live. Still is. I love the country. I go back as much as I can possibly.
And you were in Cape Town and Johannesburg, is that right?
So I was based in Cape Town, and this is where I lived, which is paradise. Yeah, beautiful. And our call centers were also in Johannesburg.
Because they're very different.
Very, very different. Yeah, Cape Town is kind of by the sea, easy going, and Johannesburg is on 2 kilometers altitude. Kind of what's that, 6,000, 7,000 feet altitude. It's very dry, different weather, different climate, and also very different in terms of how people are and the culture. Yeah. And then there was another call center location, which was in a more sleepy town in the south, right by the ocean, which is called Port Elizabeth. So I was going around these locations, working with all the people there, and that was it was a great joy and a privilege and massive learning that helped me a lot for what came after. And this is when Qatar came. So, 2 years later, my contract was up in South Africa. There would have maybe been a chance to extend that, but I was keen to, drive my career, go up further on the ladder. And I knew I had to go to the next place for that. And I was keen to see more of the world. Although I keep saying that with Cape Town, I picked the worst place to go first to, because it probably was the most beautiful place I've ever lived in.
Yeah, it's hard to go from there to the Middle East, right?
Yeah, and then I went from there to Qatar, and that's kind of how to describe it. Las Vegas is similar in a way. There's a lot of desert, and when you approach with the airplane, and when I look down from the window, there's a lot of desert and a lot of nothing, and then all of a sudden there's something. Now in Las Vegas, there's a lot of bling and a lot of action and stuff going on, and in Qatar there was a lot of desert and nothing going on. So I remember looking out that airplane window thinking, oh, what have I done? And what happened then was simply amazing. And I mean, Qatar has been a huge controversy around the world, and what happened there, and the World Cup, and how did they get it, and whatnot. I lived there for 8 years. And I would say I have my view on all that. And certainly there are a lot of things that can be better, like in any country. And I would certainly classify them as a developing country. So it has issues that in Germany or in Europe or in the United States, we don't know like that. So
are you comfortable picking out one or two things that, just rubbed you the wrong way, or you felt like were incidents where you weren't comfortable with the working conditions or anything like that?
I would say I was comfortable with almost everything because I went there to expand my horizon, right? I wanted to learn, I wanted to grow, I wanted to go to a different place that would challenge me. So I was like a fish in water. I was right in the right place. Now, the things that are there is, that, and this has to do also with my values, is, Qatar is very relationship driven. And, my value system is more merit based. So depending on who you know, then there's a way to operate that. Well, I prefer, to operate based on merit and on skills and on knowledge. So there are differences in that. And, I tell you, I did come to terms with all that and to respect that. And I learned the value of relationships and to appreciate more and to also work that more. To appreciate that and to give that more attention, because I didn't pay enough attention to that in the past, and it's super important to be successful in life and in business.
Yeah, and but it must have been challenging for you coming from you're originally from Germany. You go to South Africa, and then you're in a completely new place. Don't know the people, don't know the culture. I imagine don't know the language. How do you build this company with those challenges?
Yeah. Well, I think all of us who went there for this job were keen on the intercultural experience. And part of my purpose in life has been bridging cultures. Because there's a long story. My mother was a refugee from Hungary after World War II, and her family was kicked out of the country. And there's a painful journey that emerged out of that. And my mother at age 82 is still not quite over. And so that instilled, a deep wish in me for peace and for more understanding in the world. And so bridging cultures and doing something between cultures and mediating, that always was at the core of who I am. It was always important for me from early age childhood. So for me, all that was a very welcome opportunity or a welcome challenge to deal with that. How we did that? Well, we adjusted and respected a lot of how things are done there. And we also did some things differently. And I think key difference in the discussion about, say, the labor situation and the low wages that workers are paid, in some cases that's true, in some cases it's not true. In our case, we chose to pay the people on the entry level double of what was typical in the country. Now, of course, that had a financial impact on the business, but we could afford that. And for us, that was the right thing. And we were willing to also demonstrate that it's possible. And the other thing, and that's the big one, and this is really Graham's, the CEOs, who built the culture that we had there, which was still to this day the most amazing business culture that I ever had the privilege of witnessing and being part of. And it was centered around purpose. And this is where that conversation with that coach in Cape Town got its first connection. So, 3 years after that coach, Graham in a taxi when we met first asked me the question, so Michael, what's your purpose in life? I was like, oh my God, that's what Bev asked years ago. And here I'm meeting this guy who's going to be my boss. He's very experienced. He had been CEO in 5 companies. He had done this kind of thing before. So he was an experienced operator. At that time, I didn't know yet how experienced he was. He was amazing. And he had, curated all this knowledge of business methodology and tools and leadership methodology. And I learned a ton from him. And from that moment, the first topic was purpose. This was in 2008. Right? I mean, purpose has become a big thing, and there was a ton of books about it. Back then, there were not too many people in big business who were asking questions about purpose. He did, on the first meeting, ask me about my purpose because he wanted to know how much my purpose fits the purpose of the business that we were going to build together. And the purpose of the organization that we built there was to make a world of difference for all people in Qatar. And this all people, we always stress that. And in an environment where there's the highest density of millionaires in the world, and effectively every Qatari household is a millionaire household, probably double digit by now, and bless them. And at the same time, there are workers from Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka who work on a $200 wage. Probably now it's more. Back in 2008, the minimum was $200. Which also must be said that for where people come from, that's a lot of money, and they send back home a lot. And so, one person working in Qatar feeds a family of 20 back home. Wow. So, but anyways, so, the statement that we made in this country of saying we're going to make a difference for all of the people in the country, that set the course for that business. And everything we decided strategically was drawn from that statement and connected to that. And we always asked the question, so how's this going to make a difference for all people? And that was how we succeeded.
And Graham, big impact on your life. He had a lot of great people skills. You've talked about this before. He was, as you said, the leader of the business. Unfortunately, sadly, he passed away rather suddenly. A couple of years into the business. Talk a little bit about that experience and what that was like.
Yeah, so we had grown the business to about 400 people. We were making about $500 million in revenue annually. We had done our IPO on the Qatari stock market for $2.2 billion. So it was in many ways a massive success. And we did reach about 30-35% market share within those 4 years. So phenomenal business success. Yeah. And also phenomenal people success, because the culture we had, people loved working there. And it was amazing. It was a dream come true. This is the movie. This is the movie about a startup that hits the jackpot in every possible way. Both in the people way and in the business success way. And all that had already happened. And I get a call or an email. Back then we all had BlackBerries. That was the thing to communicate over. And the message, Graham is in hospital. And he had just attended a charity walk to raise funds for breast cancer. And went into a hospital, was diagnosed with a mild stroke. And we thought everything was going to be okay. In fact, this was on a Friday. On the Monday night, I came back from a trip abroad, and first thing went into the hospital to visit him, although I knew he was going to be released the next morning. And what he told me was, no, it's all good and I can work again. He was typing on his BlackBerry with one hand. The left hand didn't work yet. He said, I'm going to be out tomorrow, and then in 2-3 weeks, the hand is going to be fine. And this isn't the part of the brain where it self-repairs, and I'm on the right medication. It's all good. And then the last thing, and I'll share that part of the story, because I'm glad for what I witnessed there was, the nurse brought 2 trays. And Graham was a slim guy, and he was a marathon runner. He was getting ready for triathlon, for an Ironman and all of that. And I said, "Are they bringing you two dinners? Be careful that you don't get fat." And he gave me this look. And very, like a very nice look. And he said, "No, it's for Jenny. It's his wife. We eat together." And I thought, oh God, what a silly joke I made, how nice of them to eat together and to be together. I thought that was so human, so warm, so nice. And then I left with that impression of the two of them sitting down and said goodbye to Graham and bye to Jenny. And then I left. And I thought nothing. And the next morning I got a phone call at 6 a.m. And I think it was John, the CFO of our business, my colleague, who had the news that Graham had passed away from a heart attack. And even though he was under observation in the hospital, couldn't be saved. So, that was a big personal shock. He had become a great friend, a mentor. He was my boss. I had learned so much from him. And then suddenly he was gone, like nothing, just like that. And then we had to face the business and tell everybody, Graham has passed away. And what are we going to do now? And that was a great moment of a leadership situation that required all of us to step up. And Graham had carried all of that weight. I mean, people loved him. And so we had to step up and then keep the business running and then get ready for what was going to come next.
And did, a lot of fears with that sort of situation in a business that your best people are going to head for the hills. They're going to take off. How did you prevent that from happening?
Well, if we did, I'm not sure. So what happened was that it took quite a while to get a new CEO. Had this all happened 2 or 3 years later, maybe I would have been ready. I would have loved to, but it was clear at that time I wasn't ready. So there was no question about that. And then what happened was John, our CFO, stepped in interim. He had a few ideas that he put into our strategies and where he wanted to take the business, mainly about our products and pricing and all that strategy. But I think what we all didn't notice was how Graham's people skills were missed. And then eventually, the interim role ended. And even before that, it was not even a year. After 8 months, I quit. And had a conversation with her. I couldn't be there anymore. It was not the right place. It changed. The culture changed. It was also, I think I changed and I wanted to move on. And so I did. And so we amicably separated. And I'm grateful until today to Vodafone for the journey that I had with them for almost 10 years. Yeah. And I saved a lot of money out of that and then invested that in ventures and started companies. So, it allowed me to go into the entrepreneurial phase after that. In that respect, I realized that I'm quite different from a lot of entrepreneurs who started on this journey much earlier. And then lastly, to finish off that story is, eventually, the culture changed. I don't think it ever went back to the heights that it had with Graham. And maybe that's okay. And maybe that's how the world goes. And about, 7, 8 years later, the business was sold. And it still carries the name that it had back then, but it's an entirely different company now. So key learning is, and it's probably what all the wise books say too, is the culture of the organization stands and falls with the CEO. I couldn't have lived that in a more impressive, exemplary way. Yeah.
I want to ask you about the next venture. I don't know if it was the exact next venture, but you had a challenging one. This was called the Misha Shisha. So this was a product that you might describe as like a Keurig cup, which is in coffee, or like an Nespresso cup or something like that, but for a hookah water pipes. And this one, unfortunately, you sunk a lot of money into it and it struggled. So talk a little bit about that experience and some of the leadership lessons from it.
Yeah. So, obviously that idea originated in the Middle East. I was living in Qatar. I traveled to Dubai a lot and visited most of the countries in the region. And, there alcohol is not so prevalent. It's not quite compatible with Islam, with the religion of most of the countries there. But water pipes, hookah or shisha, nargile, all the names for it, it's everywhere. And in Dubai, if I go out for lunch in Dubai and I sit in a cafe outdoors, almost every person has a water pipe standing next to them, or every second person. And I'm not exaggerating. It's everywhere. Like we would have a glass of wine or a glass of beer on the table in a restaurant in Europe or the US. There it's the water pipe. So what I noticed, and I started doing them at home and getting into this, and then at that time I was married to a local woman who loved water pipes, so that also got me more into it. And at some point I say, well, I had my Nespresso machine in the kitchen, making coffee so easily, and then next to it I was preparing water pipes for my guests, and I thought, what a mess. My hands are dirty. This is very smelly, and the smell doesn't quite go away when you wash your hands. And I was looking at that Nespresso machine and those beautiful shiny aluminum capsules. That's how this should be, just take it out of the box, stick it on the water pipe, and there you go. Yeah. And I told a few people, even at that party when I first had the thought, and there was around 4 or 5 people that looked at me in amazement going, whoa, it's a really great idea. And I kept hearing that over the years. And then at some point, I presented it to a few friends that had been with me on that leadership program. And we were all too keen to start our own businesses. And we all did investments into our businesses, you know, so to kind of give a safety net to each other. So we all cross-invested in multiple businesses thinking, okay, as long as one of us makes it with their venture, then, you know, none of us are going to be poor.
Not a bad approach, sure.
Yeah, and it worked. I have to say that approach worked. That's another cool story. But what happened with Misha Shisha was then, you know, it got to the point where more than one person and some serious people encouraged me to do it.
Yeah.
And not only that, they said, if you do this, I'm going to give you $100,000 or more. Yeah, so all of a sudden, you know, I was the CEO of a startup called Misha Shisha, and we were working out of Qatar. The shareholders were in France, in South Africa, in Spain, in the Netherlands, and me in Qatar. We incorporated in the Virgin Islands, not so much for tax reasons, but for legal reasons.
Yeah,
having such a diverse international shareholder group, and I didn't want it to be incorporated in Qatar for other reasons, because it's hard to do it there and to have it safe, at least back in the day.
But what happened then? So it sounds like a great idea. People are throwing money at you. Sounds innovative. Like people would be interested in buying it. So where'd it go awry?
Well, we prototyped it. We got the parts in China. We prototyped it with a company from India. The brand agency, who did a fantastic job, Origami Brands out of Auckland in New Zealand. And we created really cool marketing for it. We took it to Dubai, to the tobacco fair. We took it to Las Vegas, to the tobacco fair there. And the feedback everywhere was, this is great, but we didn't get orders. So here's everything. It's a great idea. Still today, I still get emails every week where people hear about this, see it somewhere on the internet. I kept the website live, you know, mishashisha.com, all with SH. And I still get inquiries whenever it says great idea. We couldn't get the unit cost to the right level. Is the main thing. So it was too expensive to produce, and we couldn't sell it at a high enough price. This was one reason, so product and cost reason. The other reasons were that the regulation around the world changed dramatically towards tobacco. So we started this in 2011, 2012. And then in 2014, 2015, major regulation came into place, both in Europe and the States, basically prohibiting to sell shisha tobacco with the names of the flavors. So you cannot call it strawberry or cherry or whatever the flavor is. Yeah. And some other things. So it actually became really hard with a lot of legal hurdles. And we did realize then, and we tried to joint venture with one of the tobacco majors or to sell it to them, but it was of interest, and maybe it would have worked a year or two earlier. But at that time, their business was breaking away because they were under attack from all the vaping industry. So they were struggling to protect their tobacco revenues, and they didn't have time for a little thing like Misha Shisha. So I went through all the avenues, and eventually I had to make the tough decision. We're going to stop it.
You know, I interviewed a guest yesterday who was talking about he had gotten into kind of early SEO, search engine optimization, in the late 90s. And so like very early, but he rode this wave of, you know, adoption of digital marketing and search engine optimization. And he was talking about the importance of picking the right field. And just to reflect on these different experiences with Vodafone, you step in, you know, in the mid 2000s at a time when, you know, probably in the Middle East, I'm guessing here, but there wasn't widespread mobile phone adoption. It's an industry that was on an upward swing compared to you have Misha Shisha in an industry that's heavily regulated. You know, in parts of the globe like the United States, I believe smoking has been going down for a long time. So talk a little bit about some of those learnings in terms of what industry to go into and how that affects the ultimate outcome of the business. Yeah,
I think it's I love that. I in my mind, how I call what I think you described there, I call it the surfer analogy. And I don't surf, so I have no idea what I'm talking about now. But this is
I don't either, even though I'm in California, but I will test your surfer analogy.
Well, I lived in Cape Town. Anyway, so I can be the best surfer in the world, and I have all the skills, and I'm on the board, and I can do all the tricks, and I'm on the tip of the wave, and I do all the tricks. But if the ocean is moving into a different direction, I'm not going to reach my destination where I want to get. Right. So this is, my simple way of the phenomenon that you described there, which is there's an underlying wave that carries it, which, in many ways, I think some of the things that I've been successful with in life, I think it's more of a case that there was an underlying wave that carried me, and I was smart enough not to screw it up.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's an extra humble view. So I hope that I still achieved something. And there was always an underlying situation that made that possible.
It reflecting on our business, when I joined, I know you're involved as a accelerator coach and trainer. When I joined Accelerator, we had a different business. We were focused on doing small group events, mastermind format around the country. It was like pushing a boulder uphill. When we switched to helping other businesses to start podcasts, part of this industry that's on an upward trend, everything became so much easier, So it's like just choosing the right field to go into makes a big difference. I do want to ask, so you have had a couple of Harvard Business School studies written about you and your different business experiences, which is an honor to have that happen. You even sat in the back of the room when they discussed it. I don't know if they knew that you were sitting in the back of the room when they were discussing it or not, but talk about that experience.
Yeah. So I've been lucky twice on that. Once was the company that we built in the Middle East, Graham's company, where he was CEO. There's a Harvard business case about that. It's called, I think, Building a Telco in the Middle East. A wonderful read, a really nice memory for me when I read it nowadays. And then the second one is about Misha Shisha. And how this all came about was that I had a chance to join a 1-week course at Harvard Executive Education out of a group, there's an organization called Endeavor, who promotes entrepreneurship around the world, in particular in, I think, in Latin American Spanish-speaking countries. And because of one of the companies that I helped to scale up as an angel investor, I was part of the group of founders that was invited to go. And I took the chance and grabbed it. I thought, Harvard, awesome. 1 week, and for half the price of what it usually costs, I'm in. So I went over and I loved the experience. There's so much that I learned, not about all the cases itself, but how they do things and how Harvard teaches and, the whole way of how it works. That was a feast for me, what I learned. Because, now, we have CoA Academy, and I founded an academy and we do education ourselves. So there was major learning from that. Now, what happened with the case where I sat in the room, they do this every year when the Endeavor group comes together, that there is one failed business. And thankfully, the United States has a much better failure culture than some other places in the world. So it's cool that this kind of thing can happen. And literally, what happened was that a PhD student wrote a case about Misha Shisha, about 5 investors who were friends and fellow executives in a prior situation with Vodafone, or most of us. So that was an interesting case about how we structured that company, how it came about, and then what happened also in terms of our relationships and so forth. So there was interest on this from many angles. And of course, it was a fail. What happened there? They wrote this beautiful case study. It's 20 pages. I read through it. I couldn't, criticize a thing, put the finger on some nice things. And as all their case studies do, they don't judge, right? It's all very descriptive and very non-judgmental, which is great. And then the discussion in the room happened. So I was invited to come over. The wonderful Professor William Kerr, invited me. This was in his program, and he taught the class. And so I was sitting in the front row, not in the back, in the front row, visible to everyone.
Okay, so they knew.
Right. The CEO of the business is in the room. Here's Michael, and I'm sitting there smiling and waving and thinking, oh my God. And then there was 75 minutes of 60 brilliant minds going through this case. And asking questions and speaking their mind and sharing their opinions and having ideas. And it was wonderful. At times it was tough, obviously, because it was a fail.
Were there times you were like, why didn't I do that?
No.
No, not at all. No.
Luckily, luckily I left the room thinking I tried everything I could. We really did everything we could, and there are reasons for why it didn't work. And it wasn't because I'm a failure personally. It just wasn't the right thing at the right time.
It was a confluence of a couple of events with the industry regulation and everything too. Yeah.
And, by the way, the thing I would love to share in a way, I'm glad it didn't work because I have been anti-smoking since my early childhood.
So, interesting business to go into then.
Yeah, well, it is against my values, and maybe that's a underlying psychological reason for maybe I sabotaged this myself.
Yeah, maybe, right? Yeah.
But in a way, I was glad because my view was, okay, I'm going to start this up and then we're going to sell it to a major and somebody else is going to develop it. So for me, it was the excitement of creating something new and bringing that idea into the world. I didn't see myself 10 years, 20 years later as the CEO running it. I saw myself as the giving birth guy and then handing it over to the foster family. That's much better for it. But I was glad. So I did want to share that because there's something about values and values management, which also goes back to Graham.
Absolutely.
Massive learnings on that, to stay true to my own values. I would never do that kind of business again.
Let's bring things full circle because we're running a little short on time. To CoA Academy, you pronounce it, or CoA Academy, which I believe stands for Chief of Anything. Talk a little bit about how that came about and what you guys do now.
Yeah, thank you. With pleasure. So when I came back after 10 years abroad, South Africa and Qatar, and moved back to Germany with my wife, Patricia, who I met in Qatar, but she's not the local. I got divorced there and married there again. Whole another story if you want to talk about that one day. Maybe for a different podcast. And so we moved back and Misha Shisha was coming to an end at the time. And we changed country. We moved back. I wanted to be closer to the rest of the family here because we just had a baby who now is turning 8 years in 7 days. And so it was a big change. And I was thinking about myself, what am I going to do next? Am I going to start the next venture? Will I do more angel investments? And, now being a family man and having kids and a wife, and I was not willing so much anymore to put money at risk as I was years before. And I didn't make that much money to splurge on ventures and create a great family situation. So I did still need to make income. I do still need to make income. And, the question was what I do next. So I called this project my next big thing. And I found some mentors that helped me to come to the conclusion what I was going to do next. And I explored everything. Do I take a job again? Do I go to a corporate? Do I become an interim manager? That thought intrigued me for a while. And I came to the conclusion, no, I'm going to be a coach in this next phase of my life. Because when I met Bev in South Africa for the first time in the first meeting or after the first hour, I thought, when I grow up, I'm going to do what you do. And that was the time to come back to that decision. There was always kind of, at some point, I'm going to be an executive coach. And then I came to that decision and I went on that journey. And I went through a certification course with an ICF accredited course. I did an NLP a practitioner training and a whole bunch of self-development efforts to get there. And I learned a ton. And ever since then, when people ask me what I do, and I say I'm a business coach. I help leaders in businesses to be successful in what they do. And to be successful in their life and with their companies. And that's the purpose of my work.
And then also you've been heavily involved in the EO Accelerator program, which I graduated from. Talk a little bit about what that program is for those who haven't heard of it before, because I'm a huge advocate of it. Tell people about it all the time. I like to say I didn't go to business school, so I can't compare it to an MBA. But in my opinion, I know people that have gone to business school who say that it's even better than going to business school. Yeah.
So, and that also ties into the part of the question I didn't answer before about CoA Academy, because CoA Academy is the venture that I did found. I didn't think I would found a company again, but then I did because COVID happened. All of a sudden, leadership development and education and training became possible remote. And that's what I do now. So, we educate business leaders remote to be great people leaders. Now, with the EO Accelerator program, that's also where we cover some of that. And I have been a trainer and a coach with the EO Accelerator program. I think it's 5 years now. And I love the program from the first time I saw it. I think I was on a panel first to share experiences, and then I saw what happened there in these learning days. And I would agree that it has much more pragmatic value to building a business and scaling a business than doing an MBA. I can speak for both. I have done an MBA through that Vodafone program. They sponsored that. And I've been through the EO Accelerator. And I think definitely for scaling a venture, as an entrepreneur, the EO program is fantastic. The curriculum that we have there, which is a mix of scaling up and of EOS and of other methodology that's all put together, it's a really cool mix that over 1 to 2 year program helps entrepreneurs that already have a successful $250,000 business to scale to over $1 million. And the little secret is that I learn at least as much out of being a trainer in that program as the participants do, because for me it keeps me connected with the people who are now starting businesses, and I get connected to new ideas and new tools and new minds. So I go there for learning and growing just as much as everybody else.
That's great. I want to wrap up with my last question. I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude to those who helped you along the way. You mentioned Graham, you mentioned Beth. Other peers, contemporaries, perhaps, EO forum mates, who would you want to shout out and just thank them publicly for what they've done to help you in your journey?
I'll give a big shout out, and my massive gratitude goes to Andreas Etten. And you might even hear this. And Andreas is the person who, when I made that decision to become a coach, he is the one who asked the critical question. And he and I met under very interesting circumstances. We had to stare into each other's eyes for 3 minutes at an event where we met in Berlin. And we had never met before. And ever since then, we've had a really strong relationship. And he was one of the mentors I consulted when I made the decision. And I told him about this idea to become a business coach. And I said, yeah, but I think I got to do this first. I got to do that first. And he looked at me and said, why don't you do that right away? Why do you want to wait? That question, I mean, I can still see him. I know where we were. Those moments in life when I can still remember exactly where it was, how the light was, and kind of what went on in my mind, because I went, boom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We erect these barriers sometimes in our mind. We think I have to do these steps before I can do that thing.
And that all fell with that simple, disarming question. And he looked at me almost like he was saying, are you kidding? Why are you not doing that now? He wasn't very coach-like, there was it almost felt
Gestalt, right?
Felt judgmental. And it was exactly that mix of judging me a little bit and asking me that question, why don't you do that now? With amazement. That did the trick. And I went out of that and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a coach. I'm going to get certified. I'm going to take this serious, and I'm going to help people in leadership positions to be great people leaders.
Yeah. Well, it looks like a great program. CoA-Academy.com is the website. It looks like a great virtual program for companies that want help with leadership development. Michael, this has been such a pleasure. Where can people go to check you out and learn more about you? Is LinkedIn your place, or any other websites?
Probably 2 places to find the most is, there's my website. I have a personal website, portz.coach. Just like that, no .com after it, portz.coach. There's a top level domain for coaches. P-O-R-T-Z. Sometimes I get called Portez, but that's not a Spanish name, it's a German name. Portz, Portz.coach, or on LinkedIn, Michael Portz.
Michael, thank you so much.
John, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.